Hello, welcome back. I hope you had a nice lunch break. I'm Ray. I'm going to be introducing our panelists here for the Q&A. So to start, I'm going to introduce Robert L.A. Hancock. He's from the University of Victoria in the Anthropology Department. Cree Métis on his mother's side and English Canadian on his father's side. Robert Hancock is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology. Indigenous state relations, Métis studies, and Indigenous education and pedagogy, post-secondary are amongst his research interests. He is also currently the Associate Director, Academic in the Office of Indigenous Academic and Community Engagement, IACE. In this role, among other responsibilities, he provides faculty leadership for Lee Noet. Lee Noet consists of a series of programs designed to support graduate and undergraduate Indigenous students, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis, throughout their education at the University of Victoria. He represents IACE in various academic settings, for instance, the Strategic Enrollment Management Process as the chair of Indigenous Student Recruitment and Retention Implementation Committee. He also is responsible for delivering the Indigenous Cultural Acumen Training Foundation module on campus and outside of campus, such as the Greater Victoria Public Library, the Royal BC Museum, and the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training. Welcome, Robert. Next, we have Violetta Yosub, my apologies. She's also from the University of Victoria in chemistry. Born and raised in Romania, she came to Canada in 2005 to pursue a PhD degree at the University of Calgary. She is an assistant teaching professor of chemistry. Her research interests include using instructional scaffolding in chemistry classes to assist students in becoming self-directed learners, which can be useful for students of any walk of life, including FGWC students. She is an active member of the First-in-Class Mentorship Program, and she was first in her family to go to university, and as such, she wishes to share her experiences as a first-generation student and encourage disadvantaged students to benefit from the resources available to them on Canadian campuses. Welcome, Violetta. Third, we have Natasha Jamal from also the University of Victoria in the Co-op and Career Services. Natasha Jamal serves as a co-op coordinator for the social science program at the University of Victoria, where she wants to ensure students get a head start in making connections between what they are learning academically and how they can apply this knowledge to a professional world before they graduate. Her main goal as a co-op coordinator is to make learning relevant to all students, especially those who have been underserved or historically marginalized from higher education. Students who find meaningful careers generally do so by leveraging their social and cultural capitals, factors many first-generation students may not be able to take advantage of. Prior to serving as a co-op coordinator, she was a career educator, supporting students how to navigate the world of work. Academically, she pursued PhD work in educational administration and policy, focusing on student voice initiatives to bring about critical democracy in education, but had to abandon her doctoral studies. She has a master's degree in developmental psychology and education, and she is the first in her family to pursue a higher education. So welcome, Natasha. Waseasin Christine C., also from the University of Victoria in Gender Studies. An associate professor in the Department of Gender Studies, Waseasin Christine C. is Ojibwe from Bataway, Sault Ste. Marie in Ontario, Robinson Huron Treaty, and Lac Seul First Nation in Northwestern Ontario Treaty 3. She is first in her immediate family to attend university. She is also considered a non-traditional scholar because of her non-linear academic career. Her degrees include honors BA in psychology, a BA in Anishinaabemowin, a Master's in Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies, and PhD Indigenous Studies. Her areas of research are Anishinaabe, women's land-based economic sovereignty, queer Indigenous feminist methodology, anti-violence against Indigenous people, Indigenous decolonial knowledges and knowledge production, colonization, world building, and decolonizing the university. As a first generation student and now faculty member, she has learned the university is a place whose culture and system requires intentional and ongoing learning, skill development, and community building. Welcome, Waseasin. All right, now we have Rose Vukovic, also from the University of Victoria, Educational Psychology and Leadership Studies. She is a professor and chair of Educational Psychology and Leadership Studies, EPLS. Rose Vukovic is an educational psychologist whose scholarship focuses on ways education practitioners understand marginalized populations, especially students with disabilities. One of her projects deals with the impact of transforming policies and practices have on students and disabilities on university campuses. Her expertise on advocacy efforts for vulnerable students in educational contexts, as well as oppressive practices in education, makes her a natural ally for the first generation and working class mentorship program at the University of Victoria. Before coming to UVic, she was at the University of Minnesota, where she taught several courses which were a part of a robust first-year experience program to help students navigate the university life. She understands very well the value of mentoring students to excel academically. Welcome, Rose. Okay. So, Sunny, you can ask the first question here. Yeah, or
are you going to get to it or did you make notes? Did you make notes? No, you're reading it. Wow, all these people are so great.
Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Sunny, and Justine and I have questions that's been handed to us from multiple first-gen students at UVic, and we're going to ask you some of these questions. There's no right or wrong answers. It's how you feel. It's kind of nice to be in this position, asking you questions, and you have to answer. It's kind of like the oral exam, you know? I get to be the professor this time. So take a deep breath. It's okay. There's no trick questions. So the first question, what were some of the difficulties you faced during your studies? And were you aware that you might have had a different experience because of being a first gen? So maybe just come in anytime, and I think, Ray, you're moderating, and so everyone gets about 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
I can repeat the question if you want.
Do we start in a certain order? Do I need
No,
to start?
just start.
Okay, I'll just start because most people here have notes. I don't have any notes. I didn't prepare anything, so I guess but she said there are no rights or wrongs, so I'm passing anyway. I don't know how much you remember from my introduction. I'm from Romania. I came to Canada in 2005 to do a PhD in chemistry. I had been working for about 10 years when I came here. I did my PhD. I didn't want to have to do anything. I wanted to have nothing to do with a postdoc or anything like that, so I just wanted to find a job. But while doing my PhD, I got to teach. So other people started telling me that I'm good at teaching. I'm getting to the answer to the question. This is just the introduction. So I'll be very honest, I didn't know first gen is a thing until I've heard about it. I don't know how I've heard about it. I don't remember now, but maybe it was an email. I always thought there was something different about me because I was the first in my family who did everything, moved out for school. I resonated a little bit with our speaker this morning in the sense that I grew up in a pretty tough neighborhood, And when I say pretty tough, I mean the city I'm from in Romania has the highest criminality rate. So all I wanted was to get out of there. So I thought, maybe that was my problem. And then I realized there is such a thing that's called first gen. When I got this position as a teaching professor in chemistry, and I didn't know how to navigate academia very well. I mean, I'm a good teacher, but all of these other things that I have to do, administrative work, service, navigating the politics associated with, what happens in the department, being a female in STEM, there were many things that to me were, I didn't really consider. I didn't think they were a thing until I started to think about them as being a thing. So I didn't know that being a first-generation student was part of who I was. I just thought there was a problem that I needed fixed, and I should have read all the books about it. I thought it was my problem, my part of me. I thought I should know all of these things. How come I don't? And now I realize that, I cannot read all the books that are out there about all the problems that I have. So, did I pass?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
I guess I can go next. For me, I remember asking my mom when all these people in high school were like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We're going to be graduating. And I'm like, I'm going to take a year off. And my mom looked at me and was like, are you kidding me? So I come from a South Asian background. And she was like, where did you even hear this concept? What are you talking about? Like, it is expected. You go to university. Now, mind you, a lot of my cousins were older and they went into STEM. And I knew STEM was not my thing. And my courses where I did well was mostly English and humanities. And so I literally remember 48 hours before applications were due, I'm sitting there looking at websites being like, what do I choose? And I had that freedom looking back, which was a bit of a privilege. And I remember reading about psychology and being like, that sounds interesting. And I just submitted my application. And I think at the time on the website, I was allowed 5 choices for that package that you pay. It was like $130 at the time. And then I find myself at York University in Ontario, which is a huge number of students. I think at the time it was 40,000, and now I come from a previous institution with 80,000 students. And I was studying psychology. I assumed studying an undergrad in psychology would lead me to be a psychologist. What a nice, prestigious career. And it's only when I learned I had to speak to someone named an academic advisor that I learned, you have to go into grad school to do that. And right away, before even knowing anything about me, she just looked at me and says, everybody wants to go to be a psychologist. You need a backup plan. This isn't going to work for you. And I'm like, okay. So she looked at my transcript and opened it up and went, actually, And I knew how to get good grades because I knew what I didn't realize at the time is I knew how to play the game, which is memorize things, put it in and to be honest, undergrad psychology, I don't know if things have changed. But a lot of it was just memorize what the book says, and it was multiple choice questions and maybe short answers, and that was it. I never had a chance to do anything more than regurgitating information. But academically, that meant I was really smart, and I'm sitting here being like, oh, I found my place in some ways. So then I was told you need to do an honors thesis, so I was like, well, how do I do that? Well, you need to find a thesis supervisor to do that for you, and it's called an independent course. And I was like, okay. So I'm struggling to do that because I need to get into grad school to become a psychologist. At no point did I have any social or cultural capital to guide me. This was all just, you make a decision, you go with it, because that's what you're going to do. And then I did the thesis and then got into grad school at U of T. And I was elated. Everyone's like, that's amazing. That's the hardest thing you can do is just get into a grad school. At no point did I realize I was not in a clinical psychology program. I got accepted into a research-based psychology program, and it was funded. So I said, okay, I guess I'll do this. And out of the 7 of us that were accepted, only 4 of us finished. And it was a really tough program because what I found out after the fact, some of the politics that Violetta was talking about, was it used to be a 2-year funded program, which they then cut to 1-year funded. And I was struggling financially to finish the master's thesis. Not like I didn't know that like a master's thesis would take in itself, typically can take a year. And I really struggled and I had some health problems, but we got through it. And then because I was in academia and I was academic by nature, I was speaking to other profs, I remember thinking, I'm not happy with this master's degree. I don't know what to do with this from a job-wise perspective. And I was politely like encouraged to think of a PhD. And yet again, I go into another, academic advisor, and they said, why do another master's? You can do a PhD. It's like a master's, but you get 5 years to do it. Worst advice ever. Looking back, I didn't know that at the time. And so I went into a PhD program not having a clue of why I was there, but thinking, okay, this is probably good because, again, wasn't checking my own assumptions. I didn't have any social cultural capital. My mom was like, great, you're like moving, you're going so high in your education. That means you're going to get a really good paying job. And I had no idea what the labor market was like for those who were finishing with their PhD. Things have changed dramatically. For any PhD aspirers here, I'm not here to discourage you. I'm just trying to get you to get your information, make informed decisions. And I think looking back, authoritarianism was something I accepted and respected, culturally speaking. I didn't really think about questioning that. It was assumed that these people in positions of power know more than me, therefore I should listen to them. And I started to realize that my own experiences in schooling was actually not measuring up to that assumption. I started to realize there were a lot of like pushbacks in terms of what I was experiencing. So I think a lot of my assumptions weren't checked. I didn't have my family to go to really get that advice. And then looking back, I probably shouldn't have done the PhD work because I didn't need it for my own career aspirations. And so I think for that, that's one of the reasons why I ended up abandoning my thesis. But also, I was genuinely interested. I think for me, financially, living in a very expensive place like Toronto, and Victoria is one of those expensive cities, I was also a residence advisor, and I was basically told by my committee, if you want to finish, I was entering my 4th year, and I had some health issues that I was managing at the same time, which probably was stress-related, to be quite frank. I hope that was not me. Sorry. Or somebody out there's listening from my committee. No, I'm kidding. They're all wonderful. But what I'm trying to say is even my committee members were full tenured professors who hadn't been through that. They didn't know the shift or how to support me, even with the best intentions for my career prospects. So they just said, you know what, you're going to have to dedicate full-time work to finish. Like, you can't work that other job that you're doing. And I couldn't afford rent and continue in the academia. And I know Alfred talks about this in his book, where at some point it feels irresponsible to keep pursuing something of like there's nothing wrong with education, of course. And we talk about education's not neutral either. It's going to come later. But I think for me, I realized I had to be more responsible financially, and that meant having to let go and figure out other alternatives. And I'm okay with that now, but it took some time.
Tanchi Kyoao. Hi, folks. Thanks for the chance to be here. I think that there were two difficulties that I faced as a first-generation student as a working-class kid from Esquimalt, and I think that it's really important to start with that. The first was that I didn't know enough about post-secondary education to know that I was having difficulties. I come from a family that highly values education, in part because neither my parents had post-secondary education. My dad left school in grade 10, went back to finish grade 12 equivalent at, I think it was the Institute of Adult Studies or something at Camosun. My mom did senior matriculation, became a lab technologist, wanted to go to university, couldn't afford it. At that time, her brother, my uncle, had an option to join the Canadian Officer Training Corps. That was how he got out of Esquimalt, was to join the Army. That wasn't open to my mom. I don't think she would have wanted that. And so my parents looked at this like, university is important so that our kid has more options than he would have if he doesn't have university. I took that on very heavily. My parents made a lot of sacrifices. They told me from about the age of 12 that if I wanted to go to university, they would make it happen. And so I always knew that university was for me. And then it came to be grade 11 and they said, "What are you thinking?" I'm like, "I've heard there's this program called Canadian Studies. You get to pick courses from all across the university rather than courses in one department at McGill." I had never been that far in Canada. So my parents made a lot of sacrifices to make that happen, which means that I showed up knowing that I had responsibilities because of the sacrifices my parents were making for me to be there. And it meant, I mean, I wouldn't do it differently now, but recognizing the choices that I made, including focusing almost entirely on my studies, likely to the detriment of my own mental health, because there was that sense that I had an opportunity that my parents didn't have, and that they were passing up things to make it possible for me. That leads to that, the difficulties for me were much more self-imposed. And because my parents didn't have post-secondary education themselves, I knew that they would not be the people that I could turn to talk about the challenges I was experiencing, or the harsh stories I was telling myself about the term I tried to have a social life and got a B- average, right? Because I joined the newspaper for a term and then went, whoa, I cannot do this because my grades dropped. And so not realizing that I was having difficulties because I was so focused on doing well, or doing well enough that my parents would be proud of me, was really the biggest piece, because I realized I was essentially born with an ethnographic sensibility. I knew going to McGill that it was a different world, and that I would just try and blend in and pay attention and figure out how to fit in. Right? I remember my mom saying, my uncle he came to UVic and then went to UBC through the Army. She's like, I'm like, what was Uncle Lauren's experience like? She's like, he learned to play bridge and he learned ballroom dancing. And I'm like, great, I am not going to university in 1966, right? This is not, no, but it's about recognizing that I had to make my own path in a way that would in some ways alienate me from my parents, because I was making choices that would give me experiences that they fully supported, but that they hadn't experienced themselves. And so that was one of those really difficult pieces, coming home or actually struggling, breaking down, and having 27 cent a minute long distance phone calls after 6 p.m. with my parents collect that they were paying for, struggling and recognizing that they weren't actually in a position to help, right? As much as they loved me and cared about me, I was asking things of them that were impossible. That was a difficult part too, not realizing where do I turn to, because I wasn't building a social network that would allow me to have common experiences with people, because I was so fixated on studying. I think I'm going to stop there because I've probably been talking for 5 minutes.
That is great, Rob. Thank you. Okay, so I have notes because I can go on and on. So thank you for this wonderful conference, and for the fellow panelists for sharing your stories. So the difficulties I had, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different degrees that I was in. And I do appreciate this element of telling the story about how we got to university in the first place. That really opened up a lot for me in my own thinking about that story for me. A little shout out to my dad for his ongoing support, and that education was a big thing for him. So in my undergrad, I struggled a lot with the coldness of undergrad school and the feeling of not belonging. I think about that time in Sudbury, Ontario. It's a cold place in the winter anyways, but I just felt very much alone, like a single human being in the world. And at certain times, we might crave that autonomy. I mean, I love it now, but when I was, 19, not so much. So I really think about that for that younger generation of people, to our first-gen folks coming to university, how to create warmth and a feeling of connection, so that if you are feeling alone, it's not unhealthy. Or if you're feeling lonely, you can have ways to resolve that. I struggled a lot with, I didn't know that I was struggling a lot with it until later. I had a word to name it, but at the time I think I was struggling a lot with whiteness and the normalcy of whiteness in my psychology program. I really struggled with my first degree, just to get through. I just was not connecting with any of it. It was just like becoming dehumanized like a robot. But it was in my last year when I took an Indigenous Studies course, back then it was called Native Studies, that my whole world opened up. And I was like, this is where I needed to be this whole time. And I was really, really upset because I felt so deceived by all my professors in psychology, leading me to believe that what they were teaching was the right way and the truth about psychology. I was learning from my Anishinaabe professor about Anishinaabe psychology. So that was, what some Indigenous philosophers call an ontological shakedown. It was just changed my whole worldview. And from that moment on, I had a really different idea about the university and what I had been learning and how I had been learning certain things. In my career, I did get a decent job from that, actually quite a good job from an honors BA. And during that time, I decided I wanted to go back for my master's. I always knew I wanted to go back ultimately for my PhD in Indigenous Studies, because I had learned about this Indigenous Studies program at Trent University, a PhD program, and I just knew I wanted to do that. I always loved university and learning and knowledge and research. And of course, I was raised to get as much education as I could for particular reasons, and not to get a good job. But when I was a counselor, that was my first career, I knew I wanted to go back for my master's, and I thought, well, I'm not ready to go back for my master's because I've been out of school for so long, so I better warm up. So I went and got a second degree an undergrad degree in BA Anishinaabe at Algoma University in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And I loved that, so I had no struggles in that. I just felt so much at home, and I really, really loved all those courses I took. It was not just about the language. There was cultural courses and literature courses and all creative writing courses. In grad school for my first master's, I really struggled again with loneliness. This time, though I was a single mom, I had my little girl with me to keep me focused and keep me grounded, and I was so grateful for that. What I really struggled with and what really made me feel like that I did not belong and I'm just not going to fit here is the elitism. But the actual, because I was raised working class, and just the really feel like the way you're socialized to believe that you are better than other people because you're in a grad program. Mm-hmm. I really struggled with that. I struggled with how explicit that was. And because I was not raised that way, and I knew that this was not true. But in the same token, yes, it is something to be proud of, that you've met a certain standard and you've been accepted into it. You've been given this opportunity to do this kind of focused work, so it's a bit of a balance kind of type situation. I struggled in those spaces. I feel like I can pull off a pretty eloquent game if I need to, but it's not my preferred way to be. I just like to kind of kick back and be kind of just normal, So I really struggled with that. And then for my PhD, my dad always said to me, the further up the ladder you go, the more vicious people will be. And I learned that in my PhD, I'm sad to say, because that was a PhD in Indigenous Studies. And so I did learn that. We talk about internalized colonization with our own communities, our internalized different things within our own communities. That does exist. But also, as Indigenous folks, we have particular pressures we're dealing with in universities or institutions. There's multiple struggles, and so I don't blame anybody. It's just a situation that I wished I would have known. I would have been a little bit more savvy to, so that I could have protected myself more and navigated difficult situations in a little bit of a better way. Rob touched upon this idea that when we're in university, we're learning and how to navigate that back with our families. That's a big deal. There's Indigenous scholars who write about that. And for me, my family is my dad and my stepmom, and they're non-Indigenous white folks. And my mom, she's part of my family, and my Anishinaabe family is part of my families too. But I was raised with white folks. My dad's white. He had this idea also too of, don't think you're better than us because now you've got a degree. And so I had to navigate those kind of dynamics with my family in that way. So the grad situation was difficult. Now, this second question, were you aware that you might have had different experience because of being first gen? No, I didn't realize that until my wonderful supervisor during my master's, who stayed with me during my PhD, said, you're first gen, that means something. You're a non-traditional scholar, that means something. I didn't know any of that. And that became very important for me. I think as first gen, we're just told importantly that this is an important thing that we've achieved, that we've entered into this space. But that eclipses the fact that we're also entering into this space that is very particular, and we need skills to navigate it and knowledge. So, Chimiigwech.
I'm just joining the conference today. So who's students in the room? Are there? Oh, there's a big group. Okay. So one thing that wasn't in my bio is that I am also a first-generation college student. I'm a child of immigrants, and my parents were born in what was then Yugoslavia, and they moved to the place we called Canada. And I was raised in the Lheidli-T'enneh region, which is colonially known as Prince George. And so I knew I was different in K-12 as an immigrant child, but I didn't connect it with being first gen or working class. My dad is an electrician and my mom is stayed at home. There's 5 kids. So I'm old now. As I'm listening down here, I realize I'm becoming like a senior person, which is weird. But when I graduated high school, my first year of university was 94, 95, and I actually came here to the University of Victoria because I wanted, there's pressure to go to school. It wasn't an option to not go, but I didn't know what it meant. I didn't have help, and I went to UVic because it was far away from home. We had to use payphones to call and, Mom, call me back, whatever. And so it was just, I had a great time at UVic, but I failed. And I love telling this story. It's a long story, and I like telling it particularly when I teach first year students. I love undergrad students. And so there's if there's time, I'll tell the whole thing because it's funny. But I didn't know what I want. After year 1, I realized this was a waste. My parents can't afford this, so I took a year off, went to community college, went out east to finish my undergrad in psychology, useless degree. So I'm like, you got to do a master's degree, came to UBC, did a master's degree. Also, the first time someone said you got to do grad school, I didn't even know what grad school meant. That was a word that meant nothing to me. So went to UBC, did my master's degree in educational psychology, useless degree, can't do anything, did my PhD. And then at that point, I'm like, well, the people around me, they become professors. I guess I become a professor. And so this isn't my dream. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. You just keep kind of going along with the momentum. And it was only when this is my 3rd institution I've worked at. It's only in my first institution where I realized there was something called first generation college students. And then I started to have these, oh, is that what it was? Is that academic advisor. I had no idea what that was. So there was a lot, even since I've been in Victoria, there's another question later about, do you ever feel like you get out of that? And for me, the answer is no. Like, even since I've come back here, there's things that I connect to being a first-gen student. Like, my PhD is in school psychology. It's school psychology, special ed, and health promotion. And to be a psychologist, you have to do a year internship after the degree to become registered as a psychologist. Well, I wanted to start working. I haven't been working. You're not earning money when you're a student, and when all your friends are not going to school, and you see them buying houses and getting married and all that stuff, and I just feel like, I'm still in class. So I wanted to work right away, so I didn't do my year internship. I gave that up. And I only realized since I've been here, I think that's because I was a first-gen student, and I didn't realize I can negotiate to postpone my contract for a year. I didn't know that. So there's a lot of things that I still am learning about this experience of being a first-gen student. But the things I will either echo or add is that there is a pull, even as my family is very supportive of education, and it was seen as a pathway, there's still very much you're not better than us, and I get a lot of messaging about a lot of that messaging. So there's dynamics within the family that were really hard to navigate, and still, I'm better at it now, but part of that was me making myself small around my family. There was the pressure similar to what you were talking about in grad school because of the place that I was from, Prince George, that there was a lot of comments about, why are you here? So it was just all this stuff that I didn't understand what was happening, but I was very committed when I went back and finished, realized there was one of my community college profs inspired me to go back, and then I became similar to Rob of just like, I'm here for a reason, for community, and it hurt my feelings, and it was hard, and I was mad a lot, and I was confused, but I just kept nose down, and it's only, I would say, in the last maybe 10 years where I've really started to like look up and realize what happened? How did this become? And this is not my life, or it's not the life that I wanted, and there's problems with the discipline and blah, blah, blah. And when I was in Minnesota, we had a really robust first year experience program that I became involved in. And so I learned that there was this whole discipline. There's conferences about first generation college students. And so that got me really excited about thinking how I could contribute to somebody else having a different experience than I had.
Thank you. So there's so much gratitude for having the space for you to share your stories and for us to listen. So thank you so much for sharing your stories. The next question is about what message would you give your younger self, knowing what you know right now about first gen? And then the second part of that question is, do you still feel like you're swimming upstream, navigating this first gen idea and identity? Anyone can just step in.
Right, I'll step in. I would tell my younger self that everything is going to be okay. Because, I never knew what I wanted to be. Growing up, adults always ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And saying I don't know is not an acceptable answer to them. I don't know why would they be expecting a 6-year-old to know what they want to do. So my mom would be like, just say you want to be a doctor. I'm like, okay, I want to be a doctor. I did fight my mom a little bit. I'm like, I don't want to be a doctor. She's like, just say that. And so I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I always knew what I didn't like, what I didn't want to be. So this is how I made most of the decisions in my life. I never thought of myself as being... First of all, I grew up in communist Romania, which was a closed country. Nobody left, nobody came in. So that meant... I'm just looking at Rose because of Yugoslavia. I don't know how much you know of that or you lived of that. But I never thought, I remember looking at that. We had this globe, my sister, I have a twin sister. And we were looking at this globe and we used to rotate it and whatever we put our fingers on, that's where we're going to end up. And, you know, we would find Canada and I would be like, this is a big country. But we knew that was just a make-believe type of game. So I just, you know, my brother would, but nobody in my family went to university. My parents don't have a high school education. My parents are peasants. They grew up in a village. And my brother used to tell me, who's 8 years older than us, if you want to go to university, you need to know physics. And I'm like, physics? That's all he knew. He didn't go to university. What did he know, right? So when we started studying physics in grade 6, I tried really hard to love physics. Didn't work. So I kind of gave up. I said, oh, I guess I'll never go to university. That's fine. I'll find something else. And then, anyway, so, you know, in grade 10, I made the same decision. I decided that I liked this chemistry, and I did. It worked. So I found something that I liked. So this is how a lot of the decisions in my life were made either by other people, right? My brother said, I wanted to do philology and philosophy when I was, when you when you had to go to high school, you pick a class that you want to study, or of science that you want to study in more detail. So we had mathematics and physics, we had chemistry, biology, physics, and what they call social sciences under philosophy. So I told my brother, I want to go do philosophy. And my brother is like, you're going to die of hunger. You need to find, you're going to find something else. What did they know? They didn't know. Everything had to be practical, right? Everything had to be, you need to be able to support yourself. So anyway, I said, okay, chemistry, because I like biology, not because I like chemistry. I hated chemistry. I like biology. And then in Romania, when you go to university and you just pick your major, then, you go into chemistry. You don't go to school, you take a few courses, you make a decision later. No, you better know what you want to do when you're 18, because otherwise you have to reset every single year. And you have to pass an entrance exam if you want to change your major or the program you want to go into. And I think I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, so what was your question?
What advice would you give your younger self? And you said everything will be fine.
Everything is going to be fine. Okay, just keep an eye to what it is you don't like, and just don't do the things you don't like. And also listen to the people around you, because when you don't know what you like, sometimes people around you, they see you with different eyes. They might see in you things you're not even aware of. Like my brother knew that I can do those things he pushed me to do. And I only listened to him because he was my older brother and I was afraid of him. Yeah, and there was a second question?
Does it still feel like you're swimming upstream?
Sometimes, but not all the time. So, yeah, it's going to be okay.
I would say to myself, it's not your fault, and be kind to yourself. Understand what you can control and what you cannot control. And that I will have to work harder to figure some things out that aren't common sense or knowledge to me, because it's not something that I or my family was familiar with. For me, recognizing this now and after graduate school, and really recognizing learning is not about memorizing and regurgitating, it's about asking good questions, asking who created this knowledge, what perspective does it come from, whose voices are not captured in the learnings that you're having in university. And so that really allowed me to recognize that universities are not neutral and are not built to promote fairness. There are structural reasons why some succeed better in universities than other people, and the structures of universities are built on middle class or upper class values and are embedded in the culture of white supremacy. Work from Tema Akun, and there are many other scholars, people of color, go into this, gives a nice summary of what is the culture of white supremacy. This harms both people of color and white people. So these values include, not an exhaustive list, but you might go, oh, ha, right, if you hear them. Perfectionism, individualism over collectivism, sense of urgency, quantity over quality, worshiping the written word, paternalism, fear of open conflict, and emotions, among others. So if you're not coming from a culture where this is embedded in what you grew up with, you're going to be swimming upstream. And so you're going to be having to unlearn and relearn, and then also, ideally, not forget where you're coming from, right? So it's like, how do you manage the duality of these things sometimes? And so that question that you asked, does it ever stop feeling like you're swimming upstream? The answer is yes and no for me. Yes, because the longer I work in an environment, like a university institution, the more experience that I have and the more strategies I can build, potential strategies to help me cope and figure things out and learn from my mistakes, or what we call failing forward. However, learning from your mistakes and failing forward is also a privilege. Not everyone has that, especially in high-stakes situations, and universities are notorious this way. You mess up on one exam, good luck. If you're trying to get in, like I have a friend right now, also first in the family, she's been a nurse, professional nurse. She's going into medicine as an adult learner. And there's still, some of these med schools are looking at her grades from when she was in first year. She was 18 years old. This woman is 36 years old and already has a child. And she's like, how do my grades from when I was 18 years old tell a university institution that I want to study medicine, that I'll be a good candidate or have potential to do really well? So just know that some of these things, I'm not here to say, oh no, you made a mistake and your life is over. I'm just saying that do your best to have backup plans and not feel like this is the one thing that's going to ruin your life in some ways. And that's hard to hear. And that's where I think systems of support is going to be really important. So this is where I feel like the humility, it keeps me humble because I realize I'm always learning and I'm trying to understand a culture that doesn't always represent me and my upbringing and my lived experience. But the beauty of this is, like, look at us, we're all in this room. This never potentially even existed. I didn't have this support when I was an undergrad student. And so more and more people, the diversity of people that come into academia and university institutions, it allows more professionals to come from these lived experience so that we can build allies and partnerships and work together as communities so that we know how to better support our underserved students. So congrats on being here, and for the students that volunteered their time, and for the faculty and the professionals that came to make this happen.
So universities are pretty weird places. And I think that that's one of those pieces that I would say to myself as a 17-year-old showing up at university. And that also comes from the fact that my default mode is irony. And so I'm really fascinated by being able to step back and say, what is actually going on here? And I think that that's one of the key pieces that I think about. And I talk to the students that I get to work with about that idea that, you know, universities, as Natasha said, have a long history, a pretty troubled history. They've been designed to do different things at different times. But we can see the change in universities even, you know, I'm much younger than Ruth. I started university in 95, 96. And our orientation at McGill, the dean of the faculty stood up in front of us and said, you may think you're here for an education. You are actually here to uphold the 174-year-long tradition of excellence that is McGill. That's your first goal. Look left, look right. One of the two people you see won't be here in 4 years. I was sitting there with my best friend from high school. She was also from, she's not a first gen student, but she and I went to McGill at the same time, and she was like, what the hell is this? And I'm sitting there going, whoa, like, what is this? This is wild. And she ended up leaving McGill after the first term. I stuck it out, but I'm like, there's something maybe morbidly fascinating, but there's something fascinating about that. And I think that that's the perspective of being a first generation student. I didn't know what to expect. So I went in thinking, everything here is kind of weird. But also, the piece that goes with everything here is kind of weird is that everything here has been created by actual living human beings. Right? There's nothing literally God-given about, no matter what folks who are affiliated with McGill might have to say about their august reputation, but that sort of idea that we have an opportunity to reshape the university as well. And so I think a lot, I get to, as Ray mentioned, I get to do the Indigenous Cultural Acumen training, and we talk about the Indigenous plan. One of the aspects of that, be prepared for the work to come. And I share, when I talk about that teaching, right, I have a little chart above a little bar chart above my computer monitor that reminds me when I started my master's degree here in 2000, there were 9 self-identified Indigenous graduate students. And so when I think about the work that I do, and this is the part about swimming upstream, there's nothing I can do to make my experience better in the past, but there's a lot of things I can do to help make the experiences of students who are coming after me better. And so I think at a certain level, the swimming upstream changed for me from trying to figure out what university was to trying to figure out where the inflection point, shall we say, or where we can redirect the university, where we can make the university a better place for a more diverse, more representative group of students who are coming after us, make it better. And I also, with Lenong, I say this, I've said this to Kevin Hall, like, my job is not to help students fit into the university better. My job is to change the university to make it better suited to the students who are choosing to be here, right? I don't think that's a contentious thing to say. I have had people say, I can't believe that you said that to the president. And I'm like, well, yeah, why? And also, have you met me? So, so that's the piece. I think it's important always to maintain, perhaps not the ironic mode, but that, or not an oppositional mode, but a sense of the way things are right now are not the way things have to be. And so we might be swimming upstream a little bit, but we might also, and I mean, I don't do fish biology, but like we change the setting we're in by how we come together. And so we can swim upstream together maybe, or we can say, you know what, we're getting in a different river, that doesn't work for fish, but we can think about what it means to be working together.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, so what might you say to your younger self or to first-year students? So it's not you, it's the university. It's the first thing I'd say. And I do tell that to students that I work with right now all the time. Do not give up on yourself or your dreams or your desire to learn or that little bundle that you have burning inside yourself. You keep nurturing that. You keep it protected with a little thing of moss if you need to, and you just keep nurturing that. Like, do not give up on yourself ever. You are your best champion, but also to build your community, like to come into this place and know to build your community, to have 1 or 2 peers in your classes, in an extracurricular activity if you find that time. You know, build a relationship with professors or staff in the library or the writing center or wherever you're drawn, Cal, spiritual space, or even just with the campus grounds. It doesn't actually have to be a human being, because we can be pretty disappointing in how we don't fulfill each other's expectations. So good to, you know, learn an instrument or have a space where you can be here. Yeah, so the thing is, universities, these tough spaces, but we love them, right? We're here. They've been around for a long time. I love universities. I keep saying, it's killed me, but it's given me life, and I just wouldn't change it for anything. I know this is where I'm meant to be. But one of the other things, especially in grad school, is that, we're here to nurture our intellect, and especially if you're in grad school, you're doing research probably, and but really, really important to take care of your bodies and your mental health and your spirit. And whatever resource you have access to, use it. Like if you have that resource in your health plan to get a massage, go do it. Make time, build that into your discipline. This work, my dad used to always tell me, he was a laborer, he worked in a steel plant, and he'd say, it's not just the work you're doing as a student is with your brain, and so it's exhausting, you need to take care of yourself. And I just wish I would have had someone to tell me to take care of my body too. Mental health as well, so the intensity of it can really have a negative impact. So for me, it never feels like I'm not swimming upstream. Now that I have tenure, feels a little easier. And I guess for me, I think if it doesn't feel easy, if it does feel easy here, I want to know who it's easy for, because I want to reproduce that for everybody. For me, though, I think about, because this is a place, such a provocative place of struggle, but also just love so much about it. The goal for me, and I just offer this, is just while we're here doing this, whatever it is we're doing here for ourselves, for our own passions or spirit or practical needs, to keep in mind, similar to what Rob was saying, to keep in mind those who came before you to make this space. For those of us who come from, marginalized communities or excluded communities. So who came before us to make this space. So I often think about this in my own struggles. I think about my senior, my peers here, my colleagues here who've been doing this work a lot longer than I have. And I hold my hands up to them, Rob being one. But also to keep in mind who's coming after you. That, we think we come into the university and we're just here to get a degree, but there's so much work to be done. And, what can we do in our little bit of time here to make it a little bit better for somebody else, or for the people that are walking beside us. And then also for those of us who are social justice oriented, we can tend to get really pulled into that work. And so that's another balance that we have to learn to figure out. And so it's really easy to kind of get taken away with the social justice work of universities, or that university has bring us into, but to really also to try to balance that with our studies as well, right? And to really figure out that there's an art to that. And, I haven't figured out that art. I just don't know. I think it's lifelong learning for that. Yeah, that's what I'll say for that. Thank you.
This one's hard for me because I don't know if there would be anything I would have heard when I was 18 that I would have listened to. I knew everything when I was 18. But I do keep a journal that I don't journal regularly, but one of the things I do is have a conversation with past self and future self. And one of the things I keep telling myself is to trust myself, that I wish I would have trusted myself more. So if there's anything in there for you, then trust yourself. And I think follow the joy. Like we do a lot, K-12 is one of my areas. We do a lot of, you must learn this, you must learn this. But as adults, we don't. As adults, you get to pick what you want to do. If you don't like to read, you don't have to read. If you don't like chemistry, you don't have to do it. But I think we're doing better now in K-12 of, like when I first started university, it was you must go into the sciences, you must be a doctor. I never even knew there was a thing called psychology or anthropology or sociology. I think we're doing better now in high schools of letting kids know that there's more pathways, but trust yourself and listen to that voice that is pulling you, that's like telling you this is not right for me, and find your people that will help guide you to where you're meant to be. And the other piece that I would just add to the conversation is looking at this room, when universities were first built, the majority of us would not have, the institution was not built for us. And institutions have not changed that much since that point. It really is a model of fit into kind of what Rob was saying he resists, is fit into what we're doing, not we will accommodate for you. So for me, this question is, I don't know, I love telling students, like I love that fire, so I don't want to be the one to, like, I will tell you, go burn it down, go build whatever you need to build to make the world that you want, because you are our future and we need you to do that. For me, what I do is I still carry that little rose with me to the meetings, and this hurts me. It doesn't always work for me, because I think I'm not, because I am a first generation student. I didn't learn the rules of how do you talk to authority properly, blah, blah. But so it gets me in trouble, but I bring that person with me in committees of, why do we have these barriers to get into school? We already know GPA is biased. We know GRE is, like, so why do we still live there? So it's that, so the way I address this question is in the moving forward. And there is I think she's a comedian, but I heard this when I lived in the US, she had put it on some social media, but considering that so it's a US reference, but it is relevant, considering that the US Constitution was written with 0 women and 0 people of color, it might need updating once in a while. So it's the same thing for university spaces.
Thank you so much for all of those comments. We did have a couple more questions, but unfortunately, or fortunately, we had really great answers and reflections, so there won't be time for that. But thank you so much, and I definitely learned a lot. Yeah. Thank you so much.